Hi, I'm Jago.
Hi, I'm Sam, and welcome to the second edition of the Brno podcast.
During the first couple of days of the session, the delegates have arrived, and we've been doing a couple of days of team building in which delegates have been learning each other's names, doing a couple of icebreakers, and solving some problems within games in order to get to know each other better and prepare themselves for committee work, which will be coming in the following days.
Alongside these events, we've also had the very special events of Eurovillage and the Slav Party, within which we've had the pleasure of interviewing some of the delegates and session participants live on some of the issues that we'll be discussing in today's podcast.
But before we come on to that, we'd love to talk about our big issue for the day, which is Brexit. Obviously, we're both from the United Kingdom, and Brexit is an issue that we've both experienced firsthand and an issue that is very close to our hearts. And what I would say to you before we listen to some of the interviews from the delegates and some of the other officials is that often what I've found is I'll shamelessly say I did vote Remain, but I have found that a number of my friends voted to leave the European Union, and this has been dismissed by a lot of my European colleagues. And what I would say is listening to some of these interviews, to keep an open mind, listen to some of the points that are raised and to try and think objectively about them, try to form an opinion about them on your own, rather than to just dismiss them. Because Brexit is obviously an incredibly complex issue. While I may have voted one way, another person may have voted another way for equally legitimate reasons, and to keep an open mind about them is probably the best way to approach this issue, even though it's so polarising at the moment. So without further ado, I'd like to cross over to some of the interviews with our delegates, our officials, and see what they think about this big topic. Okay, we're here live from Eurovillage on the podcast, interviewing some of the UK delegates about Brexit. We have Toby, William, and Jamie, and we're going to ask them a few questions. So guys, what would you like to say to any other European here about Brexit? What would be your message for them? Jamie?
I'd say that even if we've voted to leave the European Union, it still doesn't mean that we're not your close friends and allies, and that we're going to stay connected and very much part of Europe, if not part of the European Union. We're still geographically close, politically close, and culturally close to all of you, so we're still friends.
Along the same lines, many of our alliances with these countries predate the European Union, some by centuries, such as Portugal. British alliance with Portugal is one that dates back to the 1300s. By no means does Brexit, which is nothing more than a change in trading arrangements, will anyway infringe on our alliances with these other great nations. So what I would say is, don't worry to my other European friends.
Our European friends should remember that 48% of the people in the UK actually voted to remain anyway. So whatever deal that comes out of it will have to satisfy the democratic decision, but it will also have to satisfy the other people of a large group who also voted to remain. So it's unlikely that a deal will be such a hard Brexit that it will destroy all ties with the European Union in the future.
Okay, guys. And if you don't mind us asking, coming on from that, would you like to tell us about some of your own views on Brexit? And obviously, none of you would have been able to vote at the time, you're a bit young, but which way you would have voted maybe, had you been able to during the referendum? Jamie?
Well, I'm still not sure, because I think there's a lot of arguments for both sides, but I definitely regret the way, at the end, the Leave campaign changed from a genuine criticism of what the EU stood for and stood against into very simple immigrant bashing, with massively, frankly, sort of xenophobic and racist posters like Nigel Farage's Breaking Point, which I'm sure he knew didn't refer to the EU, but it's this sort of appealing to the very base level of insecurity and fear around these issues, instead of dealing with them, just using it for their further own political capital. So that's what I'd say.
Well, I obviously couldn't vote, but I would have voted to leave. That is by no means an endorsement of the Vote Leave campaign for the issues that Jamie has stressed, but I believe that Britain had greater trading opportunities elsewhere in the world, not just Europe, and Britain was the only country in the European Union that traded more with the rest of the world than with the rest of the EU member states. And I also believed for other developing nations who suffer from EU trade barriers that it would be better for countries like Britain to be able to be a more open trading nation to the rest of the world. And so that's why I would have voted to leave, but not for the reasons portrayed in the campaign as we saw last year.
I'm just interested what the sort of Will thinks about the way leaving one of the biggest trading blocs in the world, how that's going to give us stronger trading relationships rather than much weaker ones, given that we'll have much less bargaining power.
The problem with this whole idea that being in the EU means greater bargaining power is that the EU is like a ship with 28 captains, rather than it having great bargaining power. Alternatively, nothing gets done. The EU took 8 years to sign a trading deal with Canada. It still hasn't finalised one with India. And we cannot trust it to finalise these massive trade agreements which would be beneficial to our economy. And the European Union is also, yes, it's a trading bloc, but it's one of the few protectionist customs unions in the world. They are a rarity. The United States of America isn't in a customs union. No one in Australasia is in a customs union. It's nowhere else, very few places in the world are you expected to all sit under the same common external tariff for trade with the rest of the world. And Britain should be no different.
Okay, so obviously already this evening at Eurovillage we've heard from the UK delegation about Brexit. They're obviously leaving the European Union. We are now joined by Barış, one of the members of the media team, who actually comes from a state that has been trying to join the European Union for some time, Turkey, and we think that maybe Barış will have some different ideas about Brexit and will bring a new perspective. So Barış, what do you think of the referendum itself and also the rhetoric and the campaign that went along with the referendum in the UK?
So, I think to start off, obviously, as like you said, the citizen of a country that has been trying to get in the EU for the last almost 50, 60 years, the idea that some countries would want to leave the EU is, of course, it's a bit astonishing to me. But at the same time, what I saw from the referendum was that it seemed to have been caused, at least the way we perceived it in Turkey, by a badly gone political gamble. And that the way it has been maintained, as of course it has been very controversial, the topics that were covered. And especially interesting for the case of Turkey was that Turkey was an active part, as far as we saw, of the debates around the leaving the EU, as there were posters and signs about Turkey of population 80 million joining the EU, and this being a reason to leave. Even though the UK of all countries should know, as a member of the European Union, that the process of Turkey's accession was very much slow, and that there probably wouldn't be any chance of Turkey getting in the EU for the foreseeable future, at least in the short term. So it was not really something to be considered by the referendum, but it was used as an argument, which I think showed the degree of the debate and how far away from the facts it could get. And I think that was slightly worrying to see that even in a country as we see it, quite developed as in its democracy, in its culture of democracy and debating as the UK, to see that the debate could go very, very out of the facts and very manipulated to a certain degree.
Okay, thank you very much for providing that separate point of view there, Barış, and I'm sure we'll be checking in with you throughout the session with regards to your own projects, and thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. It was lovely to be here.
I'm joined here by Owen, Eurovillage, from the Irish delegation, and I just want to ask you about how you think the relationship with Northern Ireland and Ireland is going to be changed by Brexit.
Well, obviously there's a lot of concern at the moment, particularly with regard to a hard border. Literally, I don't think anyone knows at the moment between negotiations between Britain and the EU. I think a lot of people are worried that we're going to return to kind of the dark ages of the 70s, where there was army patrols, at the borders, and I don't think anyone wants to return to that. So I think it's within everyone's best interest, really, Ireland, Britain and the EU, to ensure that there's no border, which is kind of the elephant in the room when we're talking about the issues relating to Brexit, in my opinion.
very interesting there how Owen talked about the specifics between the north and the south of Ireland, and how the relationships between those two nations and between the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom will be affected by the Brexit negotiations and the outcome of Britain leaving the European Union. From my personal perspective, in the case of a soft border and a hard Brexit, Brexit genuinely has the potential to open trading arrangements into the EU through Northern Ireland. And it's really kind of the onus is on Northern Ireland at the moment to make the most of these negotiations. Whilst I personally was a supporter of the Remain campaign, I can certainly see the argument for making a success of Brexit and going forward with the best intentions.
To move on from these interesting points about Brexit, which have been raised by some of the other people from the UK, but also some people from outside of the UK, we would like to talk about something a bit more light-hearted than one of our big issues, and that is one of the theme parties of the session, the Slav Party. And we've been trying to get to the bottom of the issue, which is, what is Slavic culture?
So here at the 85th International Session of the European Youth Parliament in Brno, one of the theme party nights is the Slav Party, which is happening right now. And here on the podcast, we're noticing that there's a theme to a lot of the costumes, and perhaps that this theme might not represent the actual culture that will be thought by Slavic people to be the culture of the Slavic area of Europe. So here we are, trying to get to the bottom of what really is Slavic culture, and whether the costumes that are being worn and the things that are being said about Slavic culture are true, or whether they're stereotypes perpetuated by the internet. So we're here again at the Slav Party in Brno, the 85th International Session of the European Youth Parliament, and having been told by Katerina there to talk to Eliška about Slavic culture, we have found her, and it seems that she's wearing a traditional Slavic outfit. Eliška, talk us through your costume.
So hi everyone. Well, the thing I'm wearing is basically traditional Slavic clothes from the Czech Republic. I own it because I used to do traditional Czech singing, and so I know quite a lot about traditional Czech culture, which I dare to say is a part of the entire Slavic culture. So I'm very proud to wear this because I think that is the history we should be talking about. That is what we should maybe look back to, which might inspire us, because I'm not really into the contemporary flow of Adidas stuff and squatting.
And why do you think that view, that kind of internetized view of Slavic culture and what the Slav people represent, is so popular at the moment?
Well, because it's just easygoing. I think that what the internet is showing us currently is just like people squatting in tracksuits, and I mean, of course it's fun, but at the same time, I think that this point of view is quite primitive, and I'm not really into it, because I think that, I'm gonna repeat myself, but I think that Slavic culture, or culture itself in general everywhere, is just it's just about much more than just what people wear in their free time.
And obviously we've seen here at the Slav Party that, as you've said, a lot of people are just perpetuating this stereotype, and they're enjoying themselves, which is fantastic. But if they want to find out about real Slavic culture, what would you tell them to do?
Well, explore Brno, explore Moravia, because that is basically where our culture was born. Or in general, Slavic culture, well, I think it's no problem to just take a look at Wikipedia, because that's where most of the info comes from. At the same time, they can always visit some kind of festivals around here, which I think are very, very, very well prepared. I've participated. And at the same time, I think that that's the reason why people actually like enjoying this fun stuff, like tracksuits and squatting Slavs, because there's not a very long story behind that, but behind the real tradition, there are long stories, and that's long history, and it can be quite exhausting to look into that, but I think it's worth trying.
Okay, so the word from Eliška, instead of going on Facebook, maybe go on Wikipedia and learn about the history of the Slavic people. Thank you very much, Eliška.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, so we're back on the podcast, and having just spoken to Eliška about traditional Slavic culture, we now have the story of what I've been calling stereotypical Slavic outfit that is being worn here from Vanda, one of the media team members at the session. Vanda, would you like to explain to us where this stereotype comes from?
I would love to. So in the 80s, when the Soviet Union had the representation for the Olympics, Adidas made their tracksuits, but since Soviet Union wouldn't allow any capitalist merchandise, they had to remove the logo, but the three stripes stayed. Then they started giving similar tracksuits to inmates because they needed more actual clothing so they wouldn't freeze to death because Russia is cold, yet they wouldn't give them actual genuine clothing. Afterwards, inmates who had gone out of prison or just youth that was poor started wearing similar tracksuits to the inmates to prove that they have street cred, quote unquote. And then, like early 90s, the 1% of Russia who was wealthy enough to buy actual Adidas started wearing the genuine merchandise, whilst the lower class wore the fake ones. So at some point, the entirety of Russia was wearing some kind of Adidas tracksuits with the three stripes. And now, for some reason, the entirety of Europe has an obsession with streetwear, especially Adidas streetwear, and it just kind of became an image of any Slavic nation ever that we only wear Adidas tracksuits. Whilst that is not the case, because the actual clothing is very expensive and most Slavic countries do not have the money to buy the actual thing.
Thank you very much for that further insight into some of the clothing that's being worn here at the party. And I'm sure we'll check in with you again with some of your further content on the media team, Vanda. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very interesting to hear there from some of the officials of the session and also some of the delegates of the session. Clearly, Slavic culture is something that is not only popular at the moment, but something that's slightly controversial at the moment, with it being split between traditional Slavic culture and what is seen as the Slavic culture portrayed by the internet. And it's really interesting to hear from some of the participants what they think of these two particular scions of Slavic culture.
Concluding today's episode of the podcast, we'd like to wish all of the participants, particularly the delegates, the best of luck with committee work in the coming days. We'd also like to wish you all the best with opening ceremony. Within opening ceremony, we hope that you're able to garner some tips and tricks from the session leaders, and that in the end that you're all very proud of your resolutions.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast, and we hope you tune in for the next one, where we'll be talking about a massive issue at the moment for especially people of the age of the delegates of the session, political apathy. We'll also be covering some special sections of the session, which no doubt you'll enjoy, but also the wider EOIP community will enjoy hearing about through this podcast, and we hope that you stay tuned and that you keep listening in order to hear about the big issues, the event, and in general, EOIP. Thank you very much.
This podcast was recorded and produced by Jago Lynch and Sam Stronge. Thank you very much for listening, and remember to check back for Wednesday's episode of the podcast.